Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'd like to dedicate this reading to Sean Michael Rhodes. So obvious, so uncomfortable for the people around me. Being covered in wet, bright red paint forever would have been a lot easier to live with in the world by that point than my PTSD. Just at that moment, I feel calmer than I ever have. For what seems like a long time, nothing at all happens. Until eventually I think of Vietnam. Post-traumatic stress disorder, I say, trying it on, as if she's attempting to replace my first name with an insult, and as if I'm about to let her. Yes, or PTSD if you prefer that. Tears fall straight out of my eyes, but my face, my expression does not change, and my voice is not altered, nor my breathing. Nothing about me indicates a change has occurred, and the tears are the only new element. I heard about this. A documentary on TV was talking about, what was it, the Vietnam War, I think. She stares at me and I start to laugh. This is for people who've been in a war, right? But I haven't. I haven't been in a war. But just then I think, my life has never been a war, my life has never been a war, my life has never been a war, my life has never been a war. I'm looking at the floor, I can't control my eyes. I have to force myself to breathe or I will lose consciousness. The room starts to feel like it is falling up on me. And though a shock of sadness passes into me and settles deep into my chest and broadly establishes itself there, my heart is beating very fast. I look at her and she continues. From the things we've discussed here, I would not only say that you've been in a war, but I would remind you that mostly soldiers volunteer for war. At least willingly enlist. They go as men, young men, and with weapons, training, some kind of advantage somewhere. She pauses, and this means the world to me. And then she says very softly, more advantages than you had. And her softness means the world to me. She leaned forward to let me know this was important. When she moved toward me, however, I noticed I had to remind myself that she was not going to assault me. It had been my extensive experience that a person's mood could change that quickly. What she is going to do is something even more unusual than assaulting me. Something that will demonstrate to me the very meaning of the words mind-blowing. She's going to defend me. You were a boy. You were a boy. You fought through a childhood as explosively violent as any war, but you were untrained for combat and had no way of fighting back. You had to stay in that family. And you were asked to love and depend on people who were either actively trying to kill you or frankly willing to let you die. It was as if with each one of these phrases she had turned on blinding floodlight after blinding floodlight after blinding floodlight in my ever-dark basement world, the one I had been in for years. And she made it look easy. I turned toward her and met her eyes completely for the first time, and I really looked at her. I was extremely shocked that all of these things had been said out loud, and almost couldn't react. I recognized all of it immediately as true. The word true didn't get to how true these things were. Truer than anything I learned in school, or heard in church, or from any authority. In fact, I had never heard so many true things one after the other all at once. I was astounded it was even possible. She had established a grand trust in me by saying these things. And it was such a comfort that I felt a miracle had occurred. And now I didn't want to leave the room. With these words, she drew a circle of protection around me. And that circle was the truth. There was nothing left to do then but look at her peaceably. She seemed so genuinely outraged at my situation. It was as if she was angry for me. And so in that moment, perhaps for the first time in a long time, I did not have to be angry. I began to calm down. I wondered how this was going to change my life and what it meant for my future. I had PTSD. The trauma I experienced in my life had caused me to have a disorder. That made sense. And there might be a sensible way to feel better. I kept looking at her. And now I did not look away. Nightclubs, music, sex, drugs. Yes, yes, she said. And then as if remembering to soften, I mean, sure. Lisa was always smiling and joking. She had a talent for continually displaying, in her physical presence, a tremendous personal warmth. She gave me the feeling, almost from the first moment I saw her, that she was from the future, when everything was already settled and fine, and that here she is, coming back from the future moment of your perfect well-being, and isn't it silly of you to doubt the outcome? And she was just there, from a time when you were sipping lemonade on the beach. Lemonade, beach, you, fine, it's all just a little ways ahead. My dark stuff sat there like a monster in a crate that we were having lunch on. And that crate rattled and shook, and the growl inside grew hungrier and more vicious. We both knew we would have to open it someday. And I felt sad that we would have to. Lisa made me feel that she would be sad to open it too. That is how the first 3 or 4 appointments went with Lisa. Until very expectedly, with great energy and flourish, one day, at the very beginning of the appointment, Lisa simply handed me a piece of paper and a pen. Smiling, she told me to make a list, write down everything I could think of in my past that I wanted to talk about with her. Anything that was bothering me or haunting me, even the more shocking stuff, she said. Not to hold back, whatever I did. If it was unusual, if it struck me as unusual, I should write it down. And don't worry, she said breezily, conspiratorially, as if we were both at a cocktail party and not in a brick building full of severely distressed people. I've heard things that will make your toes curl. She laughed, brimming with positivity. Oh, you don't know me or my toes, I wanted to say, as she left me alone in that room. I did nothing for 10 minutes. Slowly but steadily, the idea of a list at first nagged me and then appealed to me. Okay, a simple list with no flourishes. I thought I could do that. Like after a crime when the cop tells you that you're going to draw a picture of the monster that attacked you so that you can hunt him down together and end this once and for all. And that was the point. I would have help. And the help was right there, standing right next to me. And the person helping me assured me that she could handle it. We were in a big, well-respected office in Boston, full of professionals trained to do this. Deeply capable people. I shuddered, my mind raced. I was extremely uncomfortable, but I could not ultimately resist. My daily existence was so bad, so untenable, but this list represented a new start. Even the start of a new start. Not even the first step, but the first step I could do in 100. That will eventually lead to me taking a first step someday, that I must try to do it. When I decided to write the list, without difficulty, I wrote down the first 5 things that came to my mind in less than 10 seconds. There are no words to say how that startled me. That though I had never thought about my past seriously before, I quickly wrote down 5 things as if they had been on my mind my whole life long. Somewhere in my unconscious awareness, as if I had been memorizing them over and over, and then somehow remembering that I must also forget them. Also that one day, when it was important, I would know them by heart. With great intensity, I looked my list over like a math equation I had attempted, the successful solving of which might determine everything about my future. And I gave it no title. As soon as I wrote the list, I looked it over closely and hated it. It was like it had a life of its own, Now I had really done something. It was like everything before was okay, bad but just barely manageable, but now that Lisa was back in my room and the list was done, it was as if I had started a small but rapidly growing fire in her absence that I knew would kill us both. She stood up and said the one sentence in the world I did not expect her to say. I will admit, I am a little overwhelmed by this list. If all of your worst nightmares came true one after the other, what do you think would happen to you? How long would you be able to hold yourself together? Would you be okay after the first really bad trauma, even the first few? How many worse things could happen to you and you still remain you? The you that you yourself recognize as you. What combination of events would it take to really get to you, to really mess you up long term? Does it depend on the severity of the experience? Who was with you when it happened? What you were doing when it occurred? Maybe how old you were? Might there be a way to walk through hell and still not fall apart so much that anyone could tell this just from looking at you? Of course, the other side of that is, if all the worst things that you can imagine have already happened to you over and over, what in the world is there to be afraid of anymore? What could truly stop you? If you could heal from it, you could become very powerful in your mind. That is, if you weren't left with a psyche so fragile you'd have to be hospitalized. The fascinating thing, of course, is that everybody's list of what would be the most horrific experience would be so unique to them specifically. Though our troubles and obstacles to peace, happiness, and healing are almost shockingly similar, it seems to me that how and what we fear in a concrete form is very unique because it involves our specific personalities. I have a wonderful photo of a moment of an earthquake, and one person is laughing at the earthquake, and the person standing next to them is starting to scream in terror. What is shameful and obliterating to the self for one person is no big deal to someone else. Being exposed nude in front of the whole town for one person can make them attempt suicide the next day. I know people like that. They would experience public nudity as the ultimate fear, leading to tremendous private shame. For someone else, that would be no big deal. They would go through it with an upturned smile. The experience would make them a hero of courage and self-acceptance. I know people like that too. And yet that same person might fear something else: aliens, clowns, guns, drugs, physical violence. And there are things that make almost every human tremble. But if I had ever to write out a list of all the things in life that I imagined to be, from the very earliest days of my life, the most horrific things I could think of or imagine, all the things I hoped in my deepest soul that I never wanted to experience or see, well, that would have been the list I wrote that day in that office. And that list would have been the story of exactly the things that began to happen to me, almost as soon as I was born, like clockwork, one after the other.